Episode 1: Why Most Builders Stay Small and How Some Build Businesses That Last. Few other working professionals experience the same plight as the local general contractor. Most of the contractors I've met through serving in our local home builders association fall into one of three categories. Either they entered the space after being burnt out by large national, residential, or commercial builders trying to escape the grind of corporate red tape, they were born into it, or they got into construction because they didn't feel like they had many other options. These are real salt of the earth people, and almost all of them share one thing in common: work ethic. They care, they show up, they grind. But what I've learned is that this industry doesn't suffer from a lack of effort, it suffers from a lack of structure. Being a contractor means long nights managing people that aren't always your employees, living in a space where the rules are often undefined. It means pouring your blood, sweat, and tears into working for clients who often start from a place of distrust. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because the industry as a whole has earned a bad reputation. So builders work twice as hard just to prove that they aren't the bad guy. And that creates a vacuum, a constant pulling of your time in every direction. Busy keeping up with client demands, busy chasing money, busy fixing mistakes, busy finding the next job. Most builders aren't failing. They're just busy. And busy feels like progress until it doesn't. This realization came to me pretty early because I grew up inside of it. I learned it watching my dad. My dad was a firefighter for his entire young adult life. He worked 24 hours on with 72 hours off in between. Unfortunately, in North Carolina, firefighters don't get paid very much. So he had to have a job outside of firefighting. In his spare time, he did construction work. So when I was around 13 or 14, my brother and I started spending our summers doing windows and siding installations with him. That was my introduction to construction. And what I saw up close was work ethic in its purest form. People wanted my dad to do their jobs because they knew a local firefighter was going to do quality work. They were okay with a couple of teenagers helping out because they trusted him. I watched him work days swinging a hammer and nights making phone calls and writing invoices just to make sure there was always enough work to keep his business going and his employees paid. Because it meant food on the table, not just for us, but for the people who worked for him. Even as a kid, I could feel how heavy that responsibility was, not just physically, but emotionally. There was always pressure, always another job, always another check that needed to clear. And I remember thinking, there has to be another way to live. So when I had the chance to choose a different path, I ran as far from construction as I could. Not because I didn't respect it, not because I didn't appreciate it, but because I saw the vicious cycle of residential construction. I left because I didn't know how to separate the craft from the chaos. I wanted something completely different, and so I decided to go to college. After a failed first attempt at college in North Carolina, I landed on a school in Chicago where I went to undergrad school for business management. While I was there, I started a job with a family owned property management company in a town called Oak Park. The owners were two brothers who both had MBAs from prestigious schools in the area. They decided to join forces to buy, renovate, and lease apartment buildings in their hometown. It was my first real exposure to what small business success could look like. They weren't hustling constantly, they weren't stressed all the time. They had put in years of work building their portfolio, and it had reached a point where it actually supported them. Over about 15 years, they turned their first three-story walk-up into a multi-million-dollar real estate portfolio. And I was impressed because they had built something real, something stable, something that worked without them being everywhere all at once. At the same time, I was still adjacent to construction through real estate, and I started paying attention to how construction companies operated in the Chicagoland area. It was completely different from what I grew up around. When you called their offices, someone picked up the phone. When you needed work done, multiple companies called you back. There was real competition, real differentiation. And that meant something important. If you wanted to survive, you had to be professional. You had to be profitable. You had to invest in yourself. You had to have systems. You couldn't just rely on work ethic alone. I stuck around Chicago for around 5 years, eventually finishing my MBA. And one day, my dad, who was still operating a construction company in Asheville, called me up. He wanted me to take a look at where his business was at and help him figure out if they needed to do something to reach the next level. They had plenty of work, they were hiring more laborers, demand was growing, but they were stuck. They couldn't answer basic questions. What position do we hire next? Can we even afford to hire more people? Do our systems support growth? Or are we going to end up broke and still exhausted? I was struggling to find another job after graduation that wanted an inexperienced MBA, so I went back to Asheville for a couple of weeks to help. I rode around job sites with them. I sat in their office. I went through their financials. And what became extremely obvious to me was this: they didn't have a work ethic problem, they had a systems problem. Every decision went through them, every sale went through them, every direction to their in house crews went through them. They were trying to manage multiple job sites, answer the phones, prospect for new work, swing a hammer, and hire new people all at the same time. They were the system. And that meant that the entire business was bottlenecked by their capacity. They were their own biggest deterrent to growth. When I was riding around with them, it was impossible to ignore. Every few moments, their phones would ring. A supervisor needed direction. A client wanted an update. A supplier needed approval. And every one of those calls went straight to them. I remember sitting in the passenger seat while dad tried to talk through a change order with the homeowner, his phone buzzing in his pocket. He finally looked at the client and said, "We can't move forward until you sign off." And in that moment, I realized something. If they ever wanted to step away, even for a single day, the entire company would stall. Not because they were bad leaders, but because the business was designed to run through them. That's not a company. That's a really stressful job. That's a single point of failure. And I knew no amount of hard work could fix that. Only structure could. So I spent a few days putting together a proposal that laid all of this out. And 2 days after I presented it, my dad and his partner split ways. I still don't fully know why, but I do know this: broken systems put unbearable pressure on people and relationships. It did, however, open the door for dad and I to start our own company together. So instead of running from construction, I decided to try and redesign it, not by working harder, but by building better systems. The early days of our company were guided by three simple principles: answer the phone, do good work, be reliable. They were the same principles that had served my dad for more than 20 years. With his initial $15,000 investment, we set up a shop in my brother's childhood bedroom. It was about 150 square feet, which we quickly learned was not nearly enough to contain our egos, let alone the furniture and equipment needed to run a construction company. After a couple months of breathing each other's air, we moved into the downstairs living area, partly for our sanity and partly because we were preparing to hire our first employee. From the start, we divided our roles. I handled admin, marketing, sales, advertising, and HR. Dad handled operations, design, and construction. At the beginning, design meant napkin sketches, simple drawings on graph paper, just detailed enough for us to remember what we had planned to build after the contracts were signed. The projects were small: bathroom remodels, decks, covered porches, small additions. Everything ran through us. We found the clients, we sold the jobs, we drew the designs, we managed the builds, we wrote the checks, we paid ourselves and our vendors. It felt a lot like my dad's previous business, except this time our roles were more clearly separated. He controlled his side, I controlled mine. And at first, it worked. The first person we hired was a friend I had grown up with. We went to high school together. She even visited me while I was in Chicago. She was exploring architecture, and I was a familiar face in an architecturally beautiful city. After she returned home from her trip, She enrolled in a CAD program at her local community college. It just so happened that when she graduated a few years later, I had moved back to Asheville. We had set up our company and we hired her to do drawings and administrative tasks that were already piling up. This was my first real taste of what it means to run a company. The moment you hire someone, you inherit their stability. They're excited to have a job, and now you're responsible for making sure that that job continues to exist. That pressure is hard to explain if you've never felt it. It's no longer just about wanting your business not to fail. It's about not wanting to fail the people who are depending on you. It was thrilling and terrifying. And in the moment, I knew I was meant to be an entrepreneur. That moment lit a fire in me. I wanted to grow something that gave people the sense of stability and pride that I had seen at the real estate leasing company in Chicago. What I didn't realize was how underprepared we were for the growth that followed. In our first year, we did nearly $1 million in revenue. By year 2, we crossed 2 million. Not because we were sophisticated, but because we answered the phone, did good work, and were reliable. Referrals and past clients fueled our growth. We said yes to every contract that we could. Eventually, we hired our first project supervisor. By year 3, we had 6 or 7 employees. We moved into our first real office. By year 5, we had outgrown that space and expanded into another part of that same building. More desks, more people, more overhead. On the surface, it felt like success. And in many ways, it was. We had an employee handbook, paid vacations, job descriptions, a retirement plan, and happy customers. We were coasting on years of 50% plus revenue growth. And then COVID. Our business was built around remodels and additions, work that required being inside people's homes. And suddenly, everything stopped. Projects were halted. New work was postponed. The phones went silent. The world hit pause, and we were forced to face a hard truth. We had built a company that could grow, but not a company that could endure. We stood at a crossroads. We could tighten the ship, or we could go back to the basement. That was the moment I finally understood. If we didn't design the business would design us. And that's where the real work began. We thought COVID was going to be the thing that finally broke us. We were prepared for a drastic decline in work, and for the first year, that's exactly what we got. Everyone in our office took a pay cut, starting with us. And honestly, no one complained. People were just grateful to still have jobs when so many other companies were letting people go. It forced us to look at our business differently. We stopped assuming growth would save us. We stopped assuming the phones would always ring. We started asking a new question. If this is all the work we ever get, can this business survive? And that's when everything shifted. Because what happened next surprised us. Instead of the market staying slow, it overheated. Work flooded back in. The labor market tightened. People started jumping ship for sign on bonuses and inflated wages. And suddenly, the pressure wasn't just on revenue, it was on people. And that's when I realized something critical. You can't build a durable business if your only advantage is being busy. You need systems that protect the company even when the market is slow, and discipline when the market is hot. COVID didn't break our business, it revealed where it was fragile, and it forced us to start redesigning instead of reacting. Once we stopped assuming growth would save us, everything changed. We realized that if we wanted this business to last, we couldn't rely on effort, instinct, or heroics. We had to design the business on purpose. Not all at once, not perfectly, but one system at a time. Instead of chasing new tactics, we focused on the foundation, the business functions that every company relies on, whether or not they acknowledge them. Sales. We stopped treating sales like luck. Instead of reacting to whoever called next, we started asking, where are our leads coming from? How long does it take to close? What kind of work is actually profitable? We wanted to stop being busy and start being selective. There was a time we would take any job that walked in the door. Now, if a project doesn't meet our margin requirements or fit our process, we don't chase it. Saying no was one of the hardest skills I had to learn and one of the most profitable. Marketing. Marketing shifted from hoping to intentional. We clarified who we wanted to work with. We defined what made us different. We focused on consistency instead of bursts. It wasn't about volume, it was about alignment. Human resources. Before, HR was reactive. We hired when we were overwhelmed. We trained while we were already behind. So instead, we documented expectations. We defined our roles. We created onboarding processes, not to add bureaucracy, but to create clarity. Finance. Finance was one of the most critical shifts. We stopped looking at financials as something to review later. We built visibility into our cash flow, our job performance, our overhead, and our forecasting. We wanted to see problems early, not explain them later. The first time we tracked job performance weekly, I saw a project that had looked great on the outside and was quietly losing money. If we had just waited until the end, we would have blamed the outcome. Instead, we fixed the process. Admin. We centralized information. We standardized processes. We removed guesswork. The goal wasn't perfection, it was consistency. Operations. Operations is where it all comes together. We documented how things actually get done. We clarified who owns which decisions. We created handoffs and checkpoints. And slowly, the business stopped running through us. The first time a project moved forward without either of us approving each step, we felt something we hadn't felt in years: relief. Not because we weren't needed, but because the business could finally function without burning us out. None of this removed hard work, but it does remove chaos. It gave us leverage. It allowed the company to grow without consuming us. And for the first time, we weren't just surviving, we were designing. Most builders don't stay small because they lack talent. They don't stay small because they don't care. They don't stay small because they aren't working hard enough. They stay small because they're trying to scale effort instead of designing systems. They are trapped in a business that relies on them to be everywhere, solving everything, and carrying all of the risk. And no matter how hard you work, you can't outwork a broken structure. That's the truth I had to face. When we were growing fast, it felt like success. But growth without structure is just chaos wearing a disguise. The difference between builders who stay small and those who build businesses that last is not ambition, it's intention. The builders who last don't just build projects, they build the systems behind the projects. They design how money flows, they define how work moves, they clarify who owns what, they create visibility instead of surprises. They don't rely on heroics, they do rely on structure. And that doesn't make the work easier, it makes it sustainable. Because people burn out, systems don't. Brickonomics exists to document that journey, not from theory, not from consulting, but building one real company and learning in real time. This show is for builders who care about the quality and longevity of their community, for people who want more than just staying busy, for people who want to build something that supports their teams, their families, their communities for generations to come. In future episodes, we'll break down these systems one by one: sales, marketing, finance, operations, even leadership, and talk about what actually changes when you stop reacting and start designing. Because great buildings deserve great businesses behind them. And that's what Brickonomics is about.